Select menus allow users to select a single value from a drop-down list like this. This version of contact.php is in the chapter 10.10_05 folder of the exercise files. Let's take a look at the code. The select menu begins on line 77, and between the opening and closing select tags is a series of option tags, and the name of this select menu is OS, standing for operating system. In this example, I've added the value attribute to each of the option tags, but if you don't add a value attribute, then the text between the opening and closing option tag is sent along with the form data instead. And in the first option, I've included the selected attribute. This tells the browser which value to display. But even if you omit the selected attribute, the value of the option that's displayed at the time the form is submitted is always transmitted along with the form data. So you always get one value from a select menu, even if the user doesn't do anything. And this affects how you structure and handle select menus. If you don't want to make the menu a required field, then you can leave it like this, and if the user doesn't make a selection, the value not selected will be submitted along with the form. All you need to do is to add this to the expected array. However, if you want to force the user to make a selection, you've got two choices. One is to remove this option on line 78 completely. That will leave only valid selections, one of which will be selected automatically. The other way of dealing with this is to reject this value if it's selected when the form is submitted. The processing script that we're using in process_mail.php adds the name of a required field to the missing array only if the value is empty. So to require the user to select one of the other options, we need to make this value an empty string, so delete not selected. But it's important to leave the value attribute inside the option tag, because if we don't, this please make a selection will be used instead, and that will give the impression that a selection has actually been made. So to process this select menu, we're going to need to add the name, which is OS, to the expected and required arrays. So let's do that at the top of the file. So the expected array on line 5, we add OS, and the same with the required array. We now need to add some code to handle errors. So back down to the select menu. And the first scenario that we'll look at is if the form has been submitted and one of the other selections hasn't been made. We need to display an error message inside the label on line 76. So just before the closing label tag, insert some extra space and then a PHP block. And inside that PHP block we need a conditional statement. So if missing, that means required fields haven't been filled in, and in array, the name of this select menu, which is OS, and we're looking for it in the missing array. So if that's the case, we need to add an HTML span, give it the class warning, and say please make a selection. And we also need to close that conditional statement. So end if. The other type of problem that we need to deal with is if the form is being submitted with other errors, we need to add the selected attribute to the correct option tag, and this involves putting conditional statements in each of the option tags. The first one needs to be dealt with slightly differently. We want selected to be added when the form first loads. So I'm going to delete selected there on line 82, then add in some extra space before that closing angle bracket and a PHP block. Inside that, if not post, so in other words the form hasn't been submitted, or OS is equal to an empty string, and that OS variable will come from our mail processing script in process_mail.php, which goes through each element in the post array and assigns it to a simpler variable. So if that is the case, we need to echo selected. The other option tags need to be slightly different, so let's add this one into Linux and then the PHP block in there. If post. So this time the form has been submitted and OS is equal to the value of this particular option. So that will be Linux. Then we need to echo selected. That needs to be copied and pasted into all of the others. So copy that. Then in Mac, change the value to Mac, and then also with Windows. Adding these conditional statements in every option tag in a long select list can become very tedious, but it is very important to do it for the usability of your website. So let's just save that page, then go back to the browser, and we've made some changes to the HTML, so we need to refresh that page. So let's try submitting the form without making a selection, and it asks me to make a selection. And this time, if I do make a selection, let's go for Linux, shall we? And then submit. It remembers Linux and that error message goes away. So that's how to make a user-friendly select menu that remembers the user selection if the form is submitted with errors.